Years ago, I watched my mother lose her job after developing carpal tunnel from repetitive data entry work. She later had surgery and she was let go, and that moment really stuck with me. I remember thinking that there has to be a better way. There has to be more to life than just hand entering things. And that's what inspired me to create Connex, a tool that automates e-commerce accounting and operations so business owners can spend less time fixing spreadsheets and fixing orders in QuickBooks and more time growing their companies. That's why I'm excited to welcome today's guest. Rachel is a highly experienced e-commerce consultant who helps online sellers streamline their finances, stay compliant, and make smarter decisions with real-time data. As the founder of Net Deposited, Rachel works with Shopify, Amazon, and multi-channel sellers to simplify their accounting systems and integrate tools like QuickBooks and inventory management software. Her mission is to help e-commerce businesses get accurate financials without the chaos. In today's episode, we'll talk about the biggest accounting mistakes e-commerce companies make, when it's time to move from do-it-yourself to professional accounting, and how automation can eliminate the tedious reconciliation work, and how to prepare your books before Q4 hits. If you sell online and you want to get your financial systems under control, this episode is packed with practical insights from someone who's been there. So Rachel, let's get started with our first question. How'd you get started in accounting for e-commerce businesses?
Wow, what a question. Well, thanks for having me, Joe, by the way. I appreciate being here. So how did I get started? Well, when I first started doing QuickBooks work, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to specialize in. And I say that because although I had had a previous career working in financial operations and that kind of thing, I had taken some time off. And so when I came back to work, I really didn't want to work as an employee. And so I really wanted to have my own business. So I started to work in QuickBooks, and if anybody knows anything about that world, it's very supportive. There's a lot of independent firm owners, entrepreneurs, and people that specialize in QuickBooks. And so QuickBooks Online, I should say. Although I definitely know QuickBooks Desktop, but not sure if you know, but Intuit has actually sunsetted QuickBooks Desktop. And so although people can still use previous versions of QuickBooks Desktop, they're not selling any more new instances of QuickBooks Desktop. And I believe they're also not servicing it and supporting it or updating it anymore. And obviously, really liking this world of automation, we need to be working in QuickBooks Online. So there's a lot of really, really smart people out there that really encourage us to specialize or niche in a specific area. And my past is really working with stuff, right? I worked for companies that sold stuff, inventory, and rather than services. And so, where, lawyers or gardeners or, really anybody that's doing a service for somebody. And so that it has a special kind of accounting. And so I started to get into that a little bit and kind of thinking, well, this seems interesting. I know a little bit about it, but I definitely needed to know more. And what ended up happening is probably what happens for a lot of people is I ended up getting a client that was e-commerce, like selling on Shopify. They had a lot of different payment methods, and I was definitely in over my head. And so being the stubborn person that I am, I thought I have got to figure this out because I don't want somebody to think that I either look inexperienced or incompetent or, don't know what I'm doing somehow. So I spent a lot of time trying to reverse engineer a lot of stuff and figure it out. And I realized, I really like this because it's sort of, and as I always say, it's sort of this where kind of tech meets accounting. And that's really my niche. And I really enjoy it. And I really love figuring out things. And, a lot of people like bookkeeping and accounting because they like figuring out things. And for me, this sort of took that to the next level. And so that one client, I spent a couple years just learning everything I could about automation and, how does point A connect to point B and how does the information flow? And turns out I don't need to spend all this time doing data entry. I can get all the data in, but then what? I have to make sure I'm treating it correctly and I'm reconciling everything correctly. And so that's a very, very big undertaking. And for me, it took quite some time to really wrap my head around it, and I made a ton of mistakes. That's why my business is called Net Deposited, and I can get into that a little bit. But
Mhm.
it was really born out of a mistake. And I just realized, this is for me. I really, really enjoy the real time automation where all of the information is in the books as it's happening. And then I also just thought, this is a wonderful service to give my clients, and gone are those days of, getting a shoebox at the end of the year and looking back in time and, entering all this information after the fact. I really want to be ahead of the game. And so, I really found that I can separate myself from the herd by learning a lot of this technology and providing it for, it's almost a little bit of software as a service, plus accounting to my clients.
Yeah, and you've mentioned that it was born out of necessity and that you had made some, mistakes, but that's how you learned and call it net deposited. What are some of the biggest
Yeah.
mistakes you think e-commerce sellers make with bookkeeping and reporting?
My goodness. Well, they make this mistake that I did. And, I was really, really embarrassed when I did it. But then I realized, well, I don't know what I don't know. And, not everybody is dropped off at the top of the mountain. Sometimes people are, I know that's really a weird analogy, but, sometimes we have to claw our way to the top and figure it out. So I ended up getting a franchise. And now this guy wasn't selling e-commerce. He was using POS system, right? Which is still e-commerce. So, although people weren't, buying things off of a website, there were still electronic payments. And I still consider all of that e-commerce. And so what that means is if you go into a retail store and, something retails for $100 and you swipe your credit card and you pay $100 for it, is that business owner going to receive the $100? So they are not. They're most likely going to receive $97.55 or something, right? Because the merchant service company takes a fee. So what you are receiving in your bank account is your cash payout. It is your net deposit. That is not your revenue. Cash is not revenue, right? As accountants, we understand revenue is revenue, cash is cash. Two different financial statements, right? So what I was doing is I was taking, because I went to school for accounting. I understand accounting, but with all of this data coming in, I couldn't really see the bigger picture. I couldn't see this wasn't the revenue. I was just seeing positive, money positive, right? This is revenue. No. And so what I was doing is I was taking all those cash payouts and I was just depositing them straight to revenue. And so the trouble that you run into is then what happens if you go into that merchant service account, you pull a revenue report or a total sales report, it's not going to match what you've deposited into your checking account and put straight to revenue. It's obviously going to be a lot less what deposited. And so I didn't even get it. I didn't even know to look at those two things and tie them out. And so the customer actually fired me. And, he was very nice, luckily. And he was just like, I don't think you're doing this right. And I found somebody that explained it to me a little bit better. And so I'm going to go ahead and go with them. And I was so embarrassed. But I realized, oh my gosh, no. This guy was totally right to do this. And I totally respected his decision. We're still Facebook friends. But I realized, oh no, this is a learning opportunity. I have to make this right. And so sure enough, I did a whole bunch of digging and research and figured out exactly what I did wrong. And now I realize what you need to do is you need to post the revenue as it's earned. And then that's a transaction. And then you need to match up the payout with the sales transaction. Well,
Yeah,
there's a
exactly.
lot
Many
of things
companies
to
don't
match it up.
realize that they have to match the payouts correctly. Usually the sales receipts go into or payments going to undeposited funds, and then
Yeah.
the user matches the payout. They don't know. Many of our
Yes,
customers
exactly.
actually rely on spreadsheets, and many have been doing it for many years. And when do you think companies should make the leap from spreadsheets and then eventually go to an accounting system like QuickBooks or Xero?
Well, that's That's a really, really difficult question because what I was going to say, and you had mentioned undeposited funds, and that's definitely the correct way to do it. But when we get into, well, okay, well, that's one merchant account. What if they're selling on multiple platforms and marketplaces? And even on one platform, they're collecting payments three or four different ways. Maybe they're using PayPal, maybe they're using Stripe, maybe they're using Affirm, maybe they're using Google Pay and Apple Pay and Amazon Pay and all the pays. So when you add in all that complexity, what that means is you're seeing multiple payouts come through your bank feed. And in that situation, I don't even use undeposited funds. I will create a separate clearing account for every single one of those payment methods.
And do you find that those clearing accounts are the most confusing part about reconciling data between a Shopify and an Amazon, you think?
Not confusing for me, but they are confusing, generally speaking, until, you really understand it, which is why I'm not going to train my clients on how to do that. We provide a service, we will do that for you. We will work with them on many different things. And, this is when these clients are this complicated, I do rely on them to do some stuff. A lot of times, maybe they're paying bills, maybe they're writing checks, maybe they're doing some things, they're doing some data entry in QBO. But when it comes to revenue and, all of the sales and related fees, we do it for them. This isn't something I'm willing to train them on how to do. And I use the connector tools as part of my business to provide this service for them. And so a lot of times that question that you asked is when should they switch to DIY or from DIY to professional accounting? That line isn't always clear. And the reason I tell you this, Joe, is because the first thing we look at is usually a client will come to us and they'll say, with this revenue on my P&L, this doesn't seem right. It seems weird. Think I sold this. Or I looked in Shopify and it looks like I sold this, but my books are saying this and my financial statements are saying this. And I know what is the number one issue that they're doing?
Well, a few things. It could be missing sales from the accounting system and the selling channels.
Could be that.
They could also be putting the orders into the bank account instead of putting them into a holding account. They haven't received the money yet. So that's why the numbers are there.
Could be that too, but that's not what I'm referring to specifically. What I'm referring to specifically is this. They have bought the Kool-Aid. Well, I'm just going to hook up X, or I'm just going to hook up Cinder, or I'm going to hook up Connex or something because I think that all I have to do is just set it and forget it. And then they see these payouts coming in through their bank feed, deposit that straight to revenue. So they've got sales posting, and then they're also depositing the sales payouts straight to revenue. So their revenue is duplicated. So they've got twice as much revenue as what their marketplace is saying, or their Shopify is saying, or whatnot. So the first thing I look for is I look at that P&L, and I look to see, are there deposits in there? Because there should never, ever, ever, ever be deposits in there. The way that the revenue is posted, regardless of what company is doing it, whether it's being deposited in the form of a journal entry in which the revenue is a credit, the clearing account is a debit, and the clearing account is nothing more than expected money coming in, right? That's going to be a certain amount, and then what comes in through the bank feed is going to match to that. Match, not add. So they think, here's this Shopify payout, woo, deposit it to income. That revenue's already been posted. This is just supposed to clear at the clearing. That's it. And so 90% of the time, that's the error I see. So when I get somebody that comes to me and the first thing they say is, this doesn't seem right, that's the first thing I look at. And then I look at their balance sheet and I see, they haven't been using clearing accounts, and, fees have been posted, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a ripple effect from there. But usually that's the case. And so that tells me they don't really have a grasp on the basics. And that's okay. I mean, they're not experts. I'm the expert. I usually explain to them, and then the light bulb goes off and they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I explain to them, when you sell the $100, are you getting that $100? No, you're getting a reduced amount. And so, and I explain to them the simple, the
Yeah, they don't
revenue
understand the
credit.
concept of the merchant fees. They don't understand that it's
Yeah,
$100 minus the 3% in fees. So that's why the books and everything are off.
yeah,
They don't understand the concept of deposit matching.
yeah. And so I don't launch into the complexity of, well, an automation tool can do this. What I usually do is I explain to them like a fifth grader. This is really the nuts and bolts of how this is supposed to work. You want to make sure that you're posting your revenue grossed up.
Mm-hmm.
So because what I think is helpful is if their books, and they look at their P&L and their top line revenue sort of matches what is going on in their sales platform. And then they're like, oh yeah, I can see that. I understand why I'm paying you. Those two things make sense to me. When they're looking at a P&L and it has nothing to do with what's going on in their portal, and oftentimes they're multi-channels, they're very confused. What's in my books it doesn't reflect anything that I'm seeing here. So I like to do, now some people will say, you don't need to post this gross stuff, da 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 da. But I think it's important because I like this connection. They can see, yep, that's it. That's what I'm selling. That's what it says. And so that's what my revenue looks like
And
on my
so,
books.
what role do automation tools like a Connex, and we have a mutual customer, what kind of automation tools like our product play a role in simplifying these workflows, such as adding the merchant account fees and the multiple deposit accounts you're discussing?
Yeah. So then I will explain usually their volume. Well, sometimes I get people with very, very low volume. And I have a client that sells very, very high-end antique furniture. And so maybe she sells like one or two a week. So, but they're very, very high ticket items. But then you've got the folks that are selling tons of volume of maybe lower price things. So I have both scenarios. And by the way, that's really important to determine which connector tool you should use. But typically, if you've got a very, very high volume client, what I do is I explain to them a lot of the reasons that they've sort of gone off the rails is because it's too much data and they cannot get this all entered manually.
Yeah. They're at a
If
point where the cost to do it by hand exceeds the cost of automating. I
right,
had a client
yeah,
last week and I said, the cost for you to do this by hand is about $20,000 a year based on 40 hours a month, 12 months out of the year. I said, we could automate this for about 30% of what you're spending now. So the cost of automating is far less. Plus, it frees up a lot of their time to do other things. And that's when, yeah.
yeah. And I also have clients that, I kid you not, will be like, okay, I always ask them what their process is. We probably have the same approach when like we're talking to a potential client is we'll ask them, how do you get your data in there now? Oh, guess what? I look to see an order come in to WooCommerce or Shopify, and then I just hand key it into my QuickBooks.
Mm-hmm.
I swear some people do it that way. And then guess what? They're entering 45 sales receipts an hour. And then, so guess what? That also opens up the potential for them creating errors. And so not only are you going to speed it up, you're going to improve your accuracy. And so that's when I explain to them, well, what we do is we use an automation tool. And actually, with your kind of volume, I can't even take you on unless I'm going to implement an automation tool because the complexity doesn't come from that. When you work with a professional such as Joe from Connex, and you can help them map it, so everything can come into the correct account, or they work with me and I map it for them. All the data is going to come into the right place. And then we watch the bank feeds, make sure all these payouts match. Well, sometimes it doesn't always work perfectly. And so we reconcile these clearing accounts. And that's usually when we find something amiss.
I had
Sometimes
one
there's a
customer, and we should use Connex. When we put everything into the right slots, use our analytics tool, we figured out that 90% of her revenue came from one of her products, and the rest was from like the next five. And I said, you're carrying 350 products, many of whom the products don't match. There's a lot of bad data. I said, if you just sold your top five, you would maintain 95% of your revenue. I said, if you got rid of most of your payment processors and just kept Shopify and I think PayPal, you would reduce a lot of the complexity that you have. You could reduce the cost of all this syncing software. I said, we could make things a lot more operationally efficient with the automation. So I agree with what you're saying. Can you tell me a story about a client who transformed their business after cleaning up the accounting systems?
Yeah, definitely. Well, what I was going to say is, I explained to them why we need to use this for the reasons you just illustrated, which are super important. And I forgot what I was going to say specifically about that. But anyway, every single one of my clients, because the thing is for them, they're able to get their information a lot more faster because we're able to have everything closed faster. We simply cannot operate if we're using their spreadsheets or they're keying in orders one by one by one. So once we have everything mapped and all of the data is coming in, what we do is we'll do something else for the whole entire rest of the month. And so, like, if it was a client using it, and let's say they were doing their own accounting, they don't even need to worry about it all month until they get to their, month-end closing and they reconcile their clearing, reconcile their checking account. We usually do those two sort of hand in hand so we can make sure all the payouts are correct, all the clearings are correct. And you're narrowing down your work from every single day to, I don't know, maybe a couple hours at the end of the month. So if they're doing it, that's very tangible for them to see. If we're doing it, I can scale my business. So that's really important.
So speaking about scaling your business, we're approaching the holiday season, Black Friday, Christmas. What should online sellers do now to prepare their books for the busiest time of the year?
Well, the one thing that they need to do is they need to, if they don't know what they're doing and they're DIYing, they need to transfer it to a professional accountant like me that understands the complexity with all these different payment methods and understands the lingo and the technology of a connector tool. If they don't, and then they need to learn how to keep their books in real time. Real time is crucial when it comes to the end of the year promotional sales because you want to be able to compare apples to apples. You want to compare weekend to weekend or days to days, and you want to look at the top 5 things that are profitable, like you just said. And your tool is a lot more complex and you can look at things like that. Some of them are a little more simple and you can't necessarily get those insights. But yours, why not get rid of if you've got 400 SKUs and you're really only selling 5, why not get rid of 395 and stick with the 5? And
that's what I suggested. These companies, they think if they add more payment processors, more selling channels, more products, they can grow the business. But in fact, when I showed her the data, I said, you're actually losing money because you're not making sales. And the few sales you do, people are asking for refunds and they're not coming through to your QuickBooks correctly. And it's my software that showed her all this information. It said, just cut back on TikTok, cut back on Facebook. No one's buying stuff from you, I told her.
Yeah. So. Exactly. Well, it really depends on what they're selling. My kids buy stuff on TikTok all the time, but yeah, exactly. And when you're selling stuff, when you're a consumer packaged goods company, a lot of people think that they should have the more items, the better. And it's just not true. You really just want to have the items that sell the most and that are the most profitable. And so I'm dealing with this right now with an implementation into an inventory software that syncs into QBO. It's very, very complex and they're omni-channel. And, they have hundreds of thousands of dollars tied up in inventory because they just want to be all things to all people. And I just don't think it's that necessary to have all that stuff. And it just adds complexity because then they can't count it all at once. You have to think about that. E-commerce is 24/7. You can't shut down your operation and count everything all at once. And so, it's better to sell less. So, not all industries are the same. Obviously, there's a lot of differences between them. But if you're able to use an automation tool or if you're working with an accountant like me that's using said automation tool for you, I'm able to get you your information more accurate, quicker. I'm able to get into the more meat of the details, such as profitability and projections and things like that. If I had to focus all of my time on data entry, then I wouldn't be able to get you what you needed to grow your business.
Data entry, we're running out of time for today. How do you feel that AI and automation are shaping the future of e-commerce accounting? Can this AI help with this data entry, or like you said, prevent companies from having $100,000 tied up in inventory?
Yeah, definitely. For me, the automation is much more significant than the AI. For instance, I'm a Sin7 partner, and the inventory app that I use and am trained in and usually recommend to my clients, there is a lot of AI that has now been added into the system. And a lot of it is for projections, buying, future buying and turnover and that kind of stuff. Not necessarily with the financials. After the fact, it's usually for more forward thinking. And for that, I think it's excellent. But when it comes to the data collection, for me, it's less AI and more automation. And for me, it's crucial because I have been able to become more of a specialist and dive into the deeper end of the pool because of this automation. I would not be doing what I was doing if it weren't.
Yeah, I've been using AI to provide technical support on how to write code and build better software, and I see it as just a better tech support person. We're using AI this morning to do proof of concept for a prospective customer. Rich, I want to give you a big thanks for joining us today. And if you're an e-commerce business owner looking to take control of your accounting and accurate data that you can trust, check out netdeposited.com. And if you want to eliminate manual data entry and automate your e-commerce accounting, visit connexecommerce.com. Don't forget to subscribe, review, and share this episode. Thanks, Rachel.